Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm really excited for this deep dive.
Yeah, this one's pretty interesting.
It is. We're talking about global obesity rates.
Yeah, but with a twist.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Not just the numbers themselves,
Right.
but how they're different between men and women all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at a study called,
Global gender differences.
Global Gender Differences in Obesity Rates,
Yeah.
a comparative analysis.
Big title.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
In the data skies, we take our flight. Trends and numbers come to life. Colors and charts, they dance and play. Showing truth in a visual way. In GenderDecoded, we uncover truths and stories like no other. In the data waves we find the secret maps of humankind.
We've got this study, right, fresh from the World Health Organization, and it analyzes obesity rates across tons of different countries, but it breaks things down by gender. And let me tell you, some of the findings were pretty unexpected.
So not just like everyone's getting heavier everywhere. There's more to it.
Way more. It's not a simple universal trend. It varies wildly, and gender seems to play a huge role.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's hear it. Where do we start?
Well, let's zoom out to the global picture first. In many countries, get this, women actually have higher obesity rates than men.
Whoa, really? That's surprising. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Right. Like you just naturally assume obesity is kind of an equal opportunity issue. But this data paints a different picture. So, of course, the big question is why? Why would this be the case?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, there's no single answer, right? We're talking about a whole web of factors. But some things immediately jump out, like socioeconomic factors. They can have a huge impact on women's access to, well, everything, really, but especially healthy food choices and exercise opportunities.
So it's not just about willpower or making the right decisions. There are systemic barriers in play.
Exactly. Think about it. If you're a woman living in a rural area, miles from the nearest supermarket with fresh produce, and maybe you don't have reliable transportation, well, you're more likely to rely on whatever's convenient, right? Even if those options are less nutritious. Processed foods, fast food, things like that.
It's about what's realistically available, not just what you prefer. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we've got cultural norms and expectations. I bet those play a huge role too, right?
Absolutely. In some cultures, there are very specific ideas about what's considered appropriate for women in terms of their diet, body image, even how much physical activity they engage in.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about how food is often tied to cultural celebrations and gatherings. In some cultures, women might be expected to be the ones preparing huge feasts and making sure everyone's plate is full, even if they're not personally hungry.
Exactly. And those kinds of expectations can definitely contribute to these disparities we're seeing. The study actually highlighted South Africa, where the difference is super stark. 32% higher obesity rate for women compared to men.
Wow, 32%. That's huge. What's going on in South Africa specifically?
Well, South Africa has a really complex history that still impacts social and economic conditions today. Women there, especially in certain communities, might face higher rates of poverty, limited access to education and job opportunities, and often they're the ones shouldering most of the caregiving responsibilities.
So it's like this domino effect where one challenge leads to another, and it all kind of snowballs.
Yeah.
But this isn't just a women are disadvantaged everywhere story. The study also points to places where men actually have higher obesity rates. Vietnam and France, for instance.
Interesting, right? It flips the script. What comes to mind when you think about those cultures, especially the typical lifestyles of men?
Well, Vietnam has a strong street food culture.
Yeah.
Super delicious, but often pretty high in calories and fat. And I imagine a lot of men, particularly those working long hours and physically demanding jobs, might rely on those quick and convenient options for their meals.
That's a great point. Convenience often trumps health when you're in a time crunch. And France, well, everyone knows they love their food. It's central to their culture.
Yeah, rich cuisine, multiple courses, indulging in all those flavors, that's part of the French experience.
Exactly. And while French cuisine can be very healthy, there's also this emphasis on richness and abundance. So yeah, maybe that contributes to higher calorie intake, especially among men who might feel pressure to, live up to that cultural ideal.
It's like food isn't just fuel, it's tied to identity and social expectations. Fascinating. Now, the study LASO found some places where the gender gap is minimal, like Canada, France, and Ethiopia. They all had pretty similar obesity rates for men and women. What do you make of that?
That's a tough one. It could mean those countries have more gender-balanced lifestyles overall, maybe more equal opportunities and challenges when it comes to health.
So less of that domino effect we were talking about earlier.
Potentially. Or it could be that certain health challenges are impacting both genders pretty equally in those places. We'd need more research to say for sure.
Makes you wonder, right? Like, what factors are tipping the scales one way or the other? And speaking of tipping scales, the study also dives into countries where obesity rates are high across the board, regardless of gender, the United States and Saudi Arabia, for example.
Yes, and here's where things get really interesting. Even in those high obesity countries, the gender gap still exists. Women still have higher rates than men. It's like those underlying gender differences we talked about are magnified when everyone is facing a similar problem.
So even if everyone's struggling, women are still bearing a disproportionate burden. That's heavy. So how do we address this? It seems like we can't just throw a blanket solution over the whole world.
Exactly. One size fits all won't cut it. We need solutions tailored to each country's unique context, social, cultural, economic. And we need to address the specific needs of both men and you women.
So more targeted interventions, maybe, like focusing on improving access to healthy food in some places, promoting physical activity in others, and maybe challenging those harmful gender norms around food and body image everywhere.
Right. It's about acknowledging that complexity and tailoring the approach. Now, before we wrap up, I want to highlight something positive. The study also mentions countries with remarkably low obesity rates for both genders: Ethiopia, Vietnam, and Japan.
Oh yeah, those are the outliers. Like, what's their secret?
It's fascinating, right? They've got unique cultural practices and dietary habits that might hold some clues. Traditional Japanese cuisine, for instance, is all about fresh, whole foods, smaller portions, and a balance of flavors. Maybe there's something to learn from that.
Sounds like a whole other deep dive waiting to happen. So after all this, after looking at this global picture, what's the key takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway is that obesity is more than just personal choices. It's a reflection of the world around us. Gender and culture, they shape everything: our food choices, our activity levels, and ultimately, our health.
It's about those deeper connections, right? And realizing that there's no easy fix. So to our listeners, I challenge you to do a little deep dive of your own this week. Pay attention to the food ads you see, the conversations you hear about weight and bodies, and think about how those messages might be influenced by gender and cultural norms. It's all connected. Keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.